Ordinary people go through everyday routines, never imagining danger is already built into the familiar. In this video, we're exposing 6 of the most disturbing accidents of normal people. Each happened during activities so routine, you probably did them yourself today. It was December 14th, 2016, at a busy parcel sorting facility in Chicago, Illinois. The early morning was hectic, with holiday parcels arriving at a record pace. In the chaos of peak season operations, even minor errors could quickly become catastrophic. Alder Wren, 22, was a temporary postal assistant who had recently joined the facility to support his pregnant girlfriend while completing a night course in IT. He was new to this specific sorting bay, but had received a brief orientation the day prior, learning the mechanics of conveyor-fed parcel sorters and the importance of maintaining a safe distance from feed rollers, pinch points, and in-feed mouths. He understood the need to follow lockout procedures before clearing jams, but had yet to execute a clearance under live conditions. The sorting facility operated with tight performance targets, particularly during December. Supervisors emphasized throughput, often asking temps to perform minor jam clearances without stopping the line. Alder's hoodie was standard winter wear, but he hadn't considered how a dangling draw cord could become a hazard near moving machinery. On the morning in question, Alder was assigned to a peak traffic sorting bay where a parcel had jammed at a transition roller. The line supervisor, short-staffed and under pressure to maintain output, encouraged rapid intervention. Although an emergency stop bar existed, it was partially blocked by stacked parcels along the walkway, leaving it difficult to reach quickly. Warnings to engage the stop bar were minimal, and the stop control on the opposite side of the conveyor was functionally inaccessible in the moment. Alder leaned over the running feed to dislodge the obstruction, hoodie draw cord visible against his chest. Co-workers shouted for him to use the stop bar, but their words were partially drowned out by the machine's noise. In that split second, with everyone assuming he'd pull back safely, the first tiny mistake triggered a chain of events no one could stop. The cord caught on the upper roller, tightened, and pulled his torso forward. The machine pinned his upper chest and shoulder against the steel guide rail as the fabric was dragged between the rollers. Security camera footage shows the rollers gripping the fabric, forcing his torso hard into the frame and immobilizing him as co-workers desperately tried to reach the nearest accessible stop bar. Attempts to pull the draw cord free failed immediately, as the fabric was already under tension and partially wound into the rollers. The line continued running for several seconds before the power cut. The in-feed rollers trapped his upper chest and neck, compressing his ribcage against the fixed structure. External bleeding appeared near his shoulder, where the fabric tore skin, while co-workers frantically pressed the stop bar and dialed 911. Emergency services arrived minutes later, extricating Alder with specialized hydraulic spreaders. By that time, he had no pulse. Forensics confirmed massive blunt force and compressive thoracic trauma. The primary fatal mechanism was chest wall crush and rapid asphyxia, with multiple displaced rib fractures and severe internal compression injuries. The injuries were catastrophic, leaving no possibility of survival. The temp agency disputed liability, citing insufficient adherence to training protocols by the postal employer. Alder's girlfriend received a modest settlement after prolonged negotiations. Following the investigation, management installed additional emergency stop bars, cleared obstructions from existing stop zones, and mandated lockout training for all new employees. It was October 14th, 2017, on a moorland trail in Devon, United Kingdom. Hikers and dog walkers moved along wooded paths without concern, unaware that a sudden microburst was approaching. Sarah Whitfield, 46, was a freelance copy editor who had recently supplemented her income by walking dogs after her husband's layoff. Known locally for rescuing strays, she approached her small side business with diligence, maintaining schedules and keeping careful notes of each dog's behavior. She carried leashes, a lightweight first aid kit, and wore sturdy walking boots understanding the uneven terrain of Dartmoor's moorland and wooded areas. That day, she was guiding 2 dogs along a footpath near a wooded section adjacent to a small barn. The path was narrow, with exposed roots and leaf litter making footing uneven. She was accustomed to leaning slightly forward when the dogs pulled on the leash to maintain balance. Local weather records show that at 1522, a short-duration convective cell generated a microburst with gusts that briefly exceeded typical warning thresholds, strong enough to stress trees already compromised by internal decay. No official warning had been issued for that specific microburst, and the forecast only mentioned general windy conditions. Sarah's assignment that afternoon carried subtle risk due to the number of mature trees in proximity to the path and the weight of the dogs pulling against her. She had checked the condition of visible tree limbs earlier in her walk, but could not detect the internal heartwood decay that weakened the largest beech along her route. The ground was damp from recent rain, increasing slipperiness and reducing reaction time if sudden hazards arose. Her dogs, alert to wildlife and smells, occasionally jerked leashes sharply, which could destabilize her balance. She maintained focus, but was unaware of the impending microburst and the root plate and trunk weakness of the large beech beside the trail. According to witnesses, at 1522, a loud cracking sound echoed across the footpath. They noted a sudden tilt and downward acceleration of the tree crown. Sarah instinctively stepped backward, attempting to pull her dogs clear. But the beech, its trunk suddenly failing along a decayed internal section not visible from the outside, began to fall across the narrow path. The trunk struck her mid-torso, pinning her against the uneven ground, while branches entangled her legs and shoulders. Witnesses reported she had only fractions of a second to react before impact. The dogs yelped, but were quickly unclipped from their leashes by bystanders, who then immediately called for help. The mass of the trunk prevented Sarah from moving, and her chest and abdomen were compressed beneath the weight. Based on witness accounts and forensic reconstruction, she was likely rapidly incapacitated from the initial compression, with limited ability to respond during entrapment. Emergency responders arrived within several minutes, deploying chainsaws and manual winches. The extrication process took several minutes, during which her thoracic compression persisted, resulting in acute cardiac arrest. Even after complete removal, resuscitation efforts failed, and she was pronounced dead on the scene. Forensic examination confirmed crushing trauma to the chest, multiple segmental rib fractures consistent with flail segments, cardiac contusion, and crush asphyxia as the primary fatal mechanism, with internal hemorrhage contributing to rapid physiological collapse. In the aftermath, the local parish council commissioned an emergency tree safety audit of footpaths, though inspection backlogs and long-standing maintenance delays limited immediate corrective action. Sarah's modest pension and walking earnings left her partner financially exposed for the funeral, forcing him to apply for grants while job hunting. It was September 22nd, 2015, in Melbourne, Victoria, Australia. Most neighbors were inside preparing for dinner, unaware that the aging structures in their yards had silently degraded over decades. Lucian Faraday, 38, was a single father navigating financial pressures after a recent divorce. He worked as an administrative assistant and had developed a meticulous approach to tasks. Determined to save money and maintain control over his home, he took on small projects himself. Recently, he had begun repairing the backyard wall to create a planter area for his son's garden, digging and regrading drainage runs with a mixture of care and overconfidence. He wanted to create something tangible and rewarding for his child, but he lacked formal knowledge in structural engineering and lateral soil pressures. Lucian understood basic load concepts and wore gloves and boots, but he did not have structural support knowledge or experience with lateral soil pressure. His tools were standard DIY grade shovels, trowels, and a wheelbarrow. And he had improvised supports with scrap timber. He had checked that individual blocks were seated reasonably, but did not recognize that undermining the base soil, especially near the toe, could destabilize the entire wall. That afternoon, Lucian planned to install a new planter and redirect water runoff along the base of the wall. He removed soil directly beneath the lowest course of blocks and pried out several broken footing stones, actions that created a local void and reduced lateral support. No one was present in immediate proximity, and any subtle sounds of stress in the wall would likely have been inaudible from the house. Neighbors later noted the dust rising after the collapse, but at the time, Lucian assumed the wall remained stable. He proceeded leveling soil and adjusting the position of a few top blocks. The sun was lowering and shadows stretched across the backyard, slightly reducing visual depth perception. Doorbell camera footage shows him bending to move a block, hands on either side, with the soil at the base partially removed. At 1736, the wall began to bulge outward at the center of the unsupported section, and a progressive failure quickly followed. The compacted fill behind the wall began cascading over the edge, increasing the load on remaining blocks. Witnesses described a long, groaning sound as the wall shifted violently. A column of approximately 3 top courses, part of a wall roughly 4 feet tall, collapsed, carrying with it hundreds of pounds of soil. Lucian was struck on the shoulders and chest, his body pinned by the masonry and compressed fill. Footage confirms he was unable to move as additional material poured over him, completely burying his torso. The progressive failure occurred in under a minute, leaving no opportunity for self-rescue. A neighbor who heard the collapse and saw dust rising from the yard immediately called emergency services. Firefighters and paramedics arrived within 10 minutes and began excavation, carefully removing blocks and soil. By the time they reached him, Lucian had ceased breathing. Evidence at the scene showed soil voids at the wall's base, pried blocks, and displacement consistent with a progressive overturn initiated at the undermined toe. The coroner's report documented severe crush asphyxia, multiple rib and vertebral fractures, pulmonary contusions, and hypoxic brain injury consistent with prolonged compression under heavy masonry and soil. Death was officially attributed to compressive asphyxia. Insurance coverage was disputed because the wall alterations were unpermitted and constructed without professional oversight, with the claim partially denied for negligence. Lucian's son was temporarily placed in state care under child protection guidelines, while relatives and authorities arranged custody as the home's equity and financial situation provided no immediate guardian. It was August 14th, 2016, on the outskirts of Bangalore, India. A train track, overgrown in places and intermittently used for freight maintenance, stretched through a cluster of small fields and scrubland. To most passers-by, the line seemed dormant, but local workers knew trains could appear with little warning, and the dense vegetation along the bend limited visibility for anyone near the rails. Maintenance trains were reported to travel at approximately 12 to 19 miles per hour on this low-traffic section, making sudden encounters especially hazardous. Meena Patel, 24, was profoundly deaf and had grown up in a family struggling to make ends meet. She had begun scavenging scrap metal to contribute toward her younger siblings' schooling, navigating the tracks and surrounding areas with careful attention to sight and vibrational cues from the rails. Meena carried a small metal hook and a cloth sack, crouching to examine the rails for bolts, fittings, and discarded materials. She knew the terrain and the train's usual schedules, but the line had recently undergone minor maintenance. Vegetation along the bend had grown taller, partially obstructing sight lines, and a new freight timetable brought maintenance trains earlier than expected. Meena's focus that day was on a stretch near a small unmanned crossing, where a solitary bell was installed but relied entirely on sound, a warning ineffective for her deafness. She crouched over the tracks, scanning for scrap at the base of the rails, unaware that a maintenance train had just begun its approach. The task that morning was more hazardous than usual. A recent rail authority notice had postponed fencing installation, leaving the crossing exposed. She moved slowly and deliberately, eyes fixed on the metal at her feet, unaware that the train's presence and altered schedule had made this otherwise familiar routine. lethal. The line used standard broad-gauge track with a 1,676 millimeter spacing, leaving minimal room for entrapment between wheels. As Mina reached for a small bolt embedded between sleepers, the train rounded the bend. The horn sounded, but the curve and dense vegetation masked both its visibility and vibrational cues until it was too late. The fully loaded freight, moving at low but unstoppable speed, could not be stopped in time. A tea stall vendor standing nearby later recounted seeing the train emerge around the bend and the rapid sequence that followed. Impact occurred almost instantly. Mina was struck mid-body, thrown slightly along the ties, before coming to rest beneath the wheels. The combination of weight, momentum, and narrow rail spacing caused catastrophic trauma. Multiple fractures, blunt force chest injuries, and traumatic amputations of her limbs. The sequence and displacement matched forensic reconstructions for a train moving at the line's documented maintenance speed. The tea stall vendor shouted for someone to dial help. Local rescuers arrived within minutes, but the severity of injuries indicated death had been instantaneous. Witnesses nearby confirmed the timing and placement of the train relative to her position. Even at the reduced speed, the rail impact generated sufficient crushing force to prevent survival. The coroner's report cited massive polytrauma, including skull and chest fractures and traumatic amputation injuries, consistent with a high-mass rail impact. Death was instantaneous and unavoidable under the circumstances. Mina's family received a minimal ex gratia payment only after intervention by a local NGO, which publicized the case and highlighted the unsafe conditions at unmanned crossings. The incident prompted the NGO to lobby for visible signage, fences, and pedestrian bridges at similar sites, but no immediate structural changes were made, leaving other vulnerable individuals still at risk. It was March 22, 2017, in a residential suburb of Seoul, South Korea. In one third-floor apartment, a small home gym occupied a corner of the living room. The space appeared ordinary to neighbors, but subtle signs, slightly uneven mats, a loosely secured Olympic bench, foreshadowed potential hazard for anyone attempting heavy lifts alone. June Park, 29, worked in an office, but had committed himself to a disciplined home fitness routine. He trained alone, often late at night. Friends noted his meticulous approach to weights, but he lacked a reliable spotter and had little to no formal instruction on emergency roll-offs or self-rescue during maximal lifts. His gym included a heavy Olympic barbell with bumper plates, an adjustable bench, and rubber mats that had shifted slightly over time, creating a subtle forward slope. Despite the apparent care in his setup, minor imperfections in floor leveling and equipment placement combined with solo operation increased the risk during high-intensity lifts. Friends mentioned that June's motivation around that time was a new personal record on the bench press. He had previously managed high loads safely, but that night he aimed to exceed his own limits without engaging the rack's safety pins fully, which were loosely set for convenience. The bench itself had slightly tilted forward on the uneven mats. The combination of solo lifting, heavy weights, and improperly secured safety equipment made the exercise significantly more dangerous than usual. Based on scene reconstruction during the aftermath, he unracked the bar and began the descent. As he lowered the bar, it likely slipped forward slightly due to the mat's slope and his positioning. The bar came to rest across his neck and upper chest. With no spotter present and safety pins partially disengaged, he was unable to roll the bar to his hips or lift it off. The immediate compression caused catastrophic cervical injury. Forensic reconstruction indicated that the 350-pound weight produced cervical spinal cord transection and compressed the trachea, resulting in asphyxia. Loss of consciousness would have occurred within seconds, with death following from airway compression within a few minutes. The bar remained in position, pressing down and preventing any self-rescue, effectively killing him in that short window. Over the next several hours, rigor mortis set in within the warm apartment environment. By the time neighbors reported a strong, putrid odor to authorities nearly 2 weeks later, decomposition had advanced significantly. Purge fluids had spread beneath the bench, staining the mats and floor. Police and EMS documented the scene carefully. Plates were still loaded normally, the bench slightly forward, and safety pins not fully engaged. No signs of struggle or external interference were found. Investigators determined that the sequence was consistent with a solo lifting accident, exacerbated by minor floor slope, bench tilt, and loosely set safety equipment. Log entries from June's online training records supported the timeline of the incident. The coroner confirmed death from cervical spinal cord transection and asphyxia due to neck compression. Anterior dislocations in the cervical vertebrae matched the weight of the barbell across the throat. The estimated time of death, based on advanced decomposition in a sealed, warm apartment, was consistent with 13 to 15 days prior to discovery, aligning with rapid loss of consciousness followed by fatal airway compression. June's employer arranged for repatriation of personal effects. His sister removed all online training logs and videos, closing his social media accounts. The home gym remained in place for investigation, but was later dismantled. It was July 14, 2018, on a busy stretch of Guadalajara's Ring Road. On a narrow roadside strip, a small bus shelter shadowed a handful of pedestrians waiting for transport. The day appeared ordinary, but the conditions set the stage for a freak accident. Santiago Vera, 57, was a market vendor who relied on daily bus trips to collect fresh produce for his stall. He arrived early at the bus stop to secure a seat for transporting crates safely. Though cautious in his daily work, he had no control over the risks of the nearby highway or the massive vehicles passing at high speed. The traffic in the lane closest to Santiago consisted primarily of freight trucks, whose maintenance varied widely. While the city had issued notices regarding traffic safety, enforcement was inconsistent, leaving frequent high-speed risks for anyone near the roadway. That afternoon, a heavily loaded freight truck in the inner lane experienced catastrophic bearing failure in its left rear axle. The bearing seized and the wheel assembly partially detached, rotating uncontrollably while bouncing across the asphalt, gradually losing speed with each impact. Surveillance footage from a nearby intersection shows the wheel striking lane markings and small curbs, generating occasional sparks from metal scraping the asphalt rather than continuous sparks along its entire path. Eventually, the wheel climbed a slight gap in the guardrail and tumbled onto the pedestrian strip, striking Santiago, who was focused on counting change for his next stalled transaction and had no visual warning of the approaching hazard. Traffic camera footage and eyewitness accounts confirmed that the wheel struck the shelter squarely. The force dislodged Santiago from his standing position, hurling him backward onto the concrete curb. The tire's mass struck his head and upper torso simultaneously. Bystanders attempted immediate first aid, rolling him onto his side and calling emergency services. Ambulances arrived within minutes, but the trauma was already unsurvivable. The bus shelter showed dented framing and shattered glass, consistent with high-momentum impact. Forensics reconstructed the collision sequence. The tire's mass, combined with its speed after partial energy loss during bouncing, generated enough kinetic energy to produce acute blunt force trauma. Santiago's head and chest bore the brunt of the strike. Skull fractures, subdural hemorrhage, and internal deceleration injuries were documented by the coroner. Witnesses described the tire's rotation and bounce as a blur, confirming the rapidity of the incident and the impossibility of evasive action. The trucking company initially denied responsibility, claiming the failure was unforeseeable. Once video evidence circulated publicly, regulators impounded the fleet, issued fines, and mandated mechanical inspections. Santiago's widow pursued civil action and received a settlement. Thanks for watching. If you like these stories, click here.